Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host, the founder of stelliumastrology.com. I'm a tutor at the London School of Astrology, and I also used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine and a number of other publications and e-magazines that I've written for, horoscopes and articles and all sorts. So, I am pre-recording this episode because if you're hearing this, it means I'm on maternity leave, which is weird and wonderful for me because I am, it's my first time being a mum, and it was not something that I was ever sure that I was ever going to be. So I started up this podcast and have since discovered this wonderful news, and have been racking my brains about how I can carry on putting out content. And then I thought, hang on, a podcast is recorded. So that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of doing my best to manage, keep content coming out, and also be present in my, what they call the fourth trimester, which is when you've had the baby and then you need to rest and acclimatise to your new life as a mum, and for the baby to acclimatise to life outside of that safe, protective environment where they don't have to do anything other than just swim around in a sack of amniotic fluid. But glorious as that sounds, or gross, depending on your perspective, I thought that I would give myself a bit of a break and take the pressure off and allow myself a bit of time to adjust to new life as a mum. So I've got a few episodes that I've recorded. I've also got some content coming out on Patreon that I've prepared, so that there's still stuff coming out for you guys who are my VIPs and my BFFs. I haven't forgotten about you guys, don't you worry about it. And just in case you weren't aware, I have got a Patreon page. There are a few benefits to signing up. You get some interpretations for a monthly overview, new moons, full moons. There's a lot of bonus content for my VIPs, and you also get discounts on readings with me as well. So go check that out. I'll put a link at the bottom of the description of this podcast. Well, it will be a video actually at some point, because I will be putting content out on YouTube as well. And around the time that I go on my maternity leave is when I decided to do this. So if you happen to be listening to this right now and you'd fancy popping over to YouTube, I believe my YouTube handle is Stellium Astrology or Stellium Astro. I will add a link to my YouTube channel, and you can go and check out the podcast and subscribe. That would be so amazing if you could subscribe. I would appreciate that so much. Also, I'm branching out to YouTube. Check me out, doing all sorts of things. But today I thought I'd do a short episode, just like I used to promise that I would do back in the old days, back in the beginning of the podcast, when I said that my episodes would be 20 minutes long. I mean, how optimistic was that? A 20-minute episode. Ugh, I just don't even know what kind of reality I was living in when I thought I could actually speak about something as complex and interesting as astrology without going on for hours on end. But actually I'm reclaiming that claim, and I am going to ask that you guys bear with me so that I can put out continual content. It may not be as long as in depth, however it is content which I still hope you find value and relevance in. Now, today I wanted to talk about when astrology does more harm than good, because I'm kind of going through at the moment thinking about ethical practice, and I have some ethics sounds boring. However, astrology is actually, ethical practice is very important. The reason being that usually ethical practice standards have to be born from practices that have been so bad or done in such a way that it has caused some kind of damage or trauma or difficulty to the person receiving that service. Now, obviously, there are ethical frameworks in a variety of different fields. If you're working as a doctor, if you're working as a nurse, if you're working in a counselling or therapeutic setting, there has to be some kind of ethical kind of framework that you work within. And I did tell a story about why I am so interested in ethical standards. I had a very bad experience with somebody who is a professional astrologer when I went out to India, and I decided when I had that experience afterwards that I never ever wanted to make any of my clients feel the way that he made me feel. So if you haven't checked out that episode, there is an episode about my experience in India and quite what it did for me, and actually how it, maybe I didn't touch on the what it did to my faith in the astrological community, but it really damaged my faith in that community as well. And it just made me want to become somebody who made positive change. And I suppose now I've got this platform to speak to people on, I can talk about why I think this is so important. But if you haven't heard that episode, I would urge you to go back and listen. It did end up being a bit of a long one because I just had a lot to say about the subject, basically. And I talked in great depth about what happened in my experience. And the reason I shared it on this platform is because I wanted to make sure everybody knows that I know that's not the worst experience you could ever have. But it was a horrible experience for me to have to go through, and I just wanted people to be aware that these things can happen, and also, to trust your intuition sometimes with these things. And if somebody seems to be a little bit off for whatever reason, to trust that feeling. So anyway, today I want to talk about when astrology does a bit more harm than it does good. And when you go, depending on your stance with astrology, depending on how far you have gone with astrology, and how seriously you take your studies, it depends, I guess, on your approach and your perspective. There's different generations of people that practice that come from different, completely different attitudes. I'm currently I've been watching Mad Men, and I've seen it so many times before, and every single time I watch it, it still shocks me, the behaviour that they portray in that show, because it was normal behaviour back then. The kind of things they got up to was, okay, maybe an office party was not so raucous, but I don't know. And I have been to some raucous office parties, believe me. I have seen some things, but, it's just the general attitude is so different. Equality just didn't really exist back then. And this Mad Men is based in an advertising agency in the 1960s. If you haven't seen it, it's a really good series. It's really, really incredible. And just like amazing, the sets, the costumes and everything. I did even write an article about Venus and the Moon and the how advertising satisfies us in some way, and kind of appeals to some of our most basic instincts and fears, and that craving for security in some way. So I do find it a source of inspiration. Actually, it's quite a great show to really get yourself thinking about really moral attitudes, and it does really trigger that in me. But anyway, I'm getting on a Mad Men vibe. What I'm kind of saying is that there are lots of different attitudes towards what's acceptable, and now we're living in a day and age where some people think that we're a bit of a nanny state where we just care too much about how other people feel, and it overrides logic sometimes. But I don't feel that's the case when you need to have observe some kind of ethical approach in a professional context. And I believe that as an astrologer, when you enter into a consultation with somebody, you are essentially a caregiver, and it's a therapeutic, because that person is, by giving you their chart details and sitting down ready for a consultation with you, they are vulnerable to you when you sit down to read in response. And there were a lot of people, I remember when I used to talk about astrology, when I first started learning, they went, I don't want to know when I'm going to die. And I used to say, I wouldn't even tell you that. I wouldn't even know where to look. And to be honest with you, I don't really understand it when people say that they can tell when somebody's going to die. Maybe if you've done great studies into that type of thing, you could, and maybe there's indicators when somebody's at a certain point in their life or something like that. You might be able to see something and think, oh, that doesn't look too promising. You might see things like that, but you wouldn't look at a reading and go, well, you're going to die when you're 61. You're going to get pneumonia or something. I think that some astrologers, maybe there's some people out there that can see that kind of thing. Myself personally, I just don't want to learn about that area because I just don't want to ever see that stuff. I don't want to see it, let alone scare somebody with it. So, I don't know. There's maybe people out there that are very interested in that sort of thing and they want to see that kind of thing. And it probably is a very interesting and fascinating area. I did actually attend a talk once about somebody who was looking at that kind of thing in the natal chart, but it wasn't like find out when you're going to die. It was just more, this is when people died and let's look at this, let's look at what happened in the chart at this time and what does this mean, what does it mean about their passing, and what does it mean about after their passing, and playing with ideas about the afterlife and things like that. So I think that astrology has to be respected. I am a Capricorn, by the way. I'm sure everybody who listens to the podcast is aware, but for me to be talking about something like ethical framework, respecting the subject and respecting the client, and being quite as professional as you possibly can in this setting, is just something that I feel is an essential thing that you're doing when you're entering into this therapeutic environment. Oh, somebody's ringing a bell outside. I thought for a second I must be cooked. Anyway, so the dangers of getting a reading. I've got a list, a few pointers to follow. So the first thing on my list I've got is inexperienced or inarticulate astrologers, perhaps people who haven't trained in counselling skills and self-awareness. Now, I'm not saying every astrologer has to train in counselling skills. That really isn't something that you have to do. You don't have to be a qualified counsellor or therapist in any way. However, I don't think it can hurt to train. I don't think it can hurt to do, a little bit of work. I have previously studied a certificate in counselling skills, and I definitely want to take it further. I definitely want to go up to the next level. I want to basically, I'd love to fully train as a counsellor properly. Because even studying level 2 was just so, it's level 2 certificate at the framework level 3, but it was such an eye-opener. It was such an exploration into myself. It's so interesting to think that you'd be going there to learn about counselling other people, and the thing that you do most is sit there and learn about you and what you're bringing to the interaction. And by what I mean by what you're bringing, it's not just about guiding somebody through their issues. It's about not becoming emotionally invested or projecting your fears or your difficulties onto that situation. And I've had conversations with people where they've talked from their own perspective in such a way that you kind of think, wow, I mean, that's not really anything to do with me, but you just kind of keep your mouth shut because you think, well, I'm not going to be able to convince them otherwise because that's where they're coming from, and they kind of don't seem to want to see it in any other way. And from studying counselling skills, you realise there's so much of yourself that you can put across into a reading, which assumes a lot about the other person. And not just assumes, but you project a lot about, your own fears and your own issues and your own reservations onto that person. And it may not apply to them at all. And you may influence their decisions and their outcomes completely unnecessarily. And I do know a few people who have, I had a reading from somebody who told me they weren't into that psychological stuff and they thought it was a bit icky. And the amount of projection that was going on in that reading, I'm talking about my India experience again, it was quite shocking. So, I would say if you're getting a reading from somebody who doesn't have much experience with astrology and they're struggling to articulate things, they can break things down to extremely basic explanations. One of them being that, I mentioned in a previous episode that I have a Scorpio moon in the 5th house. And the amount of times a man's looked at my chart and immediately sort of like raised his eyebrows like, that's a sexy placement for a Scorpio moon. And it just really, really annoys me to think that people can just look at that placement and make that assumption, because it's so much more than just that base level. It's so much more than that. So, a limited knowledge and vocabulary can kind of limit your interaction. That said, if you're a young astrologer or if you're new to the field and you're learning and you're reading other people's charts, of course you've got to start somewhere. And, you have to read charts, and, if you haven't got a great vocabulary and great knowledge, but what you're looking at is a 5th house Scorpio moon, my advice to you would be to try and develop a bit more than just hanging around on issues of sex and, flirtation. Yes, some people come to you for readings for love. Some people come to you for readings for work and money and family and moving house and whatever issues come up. But it's going to be much more helpful if you can try and think about something other than the most readily available thought in your head, which is like basic, basic stuff like, sun in the 8th house. Oh, that's, the house of sex, death and rebirth. It's a bit more than that. It's just so much more than that. And, 5th house, well, oh gosh, that's like passions and sex and children. There's more, there can be more to a reading, and the more you talk and the more you read and the more you learn, the better you'll get. But I do find that there's an awful lot of stuff doing the rounds on Instagram or in Facebook groups where people say, the other day someone said, I've got Venus in Leo, he's got Venus in Capricorn, and I'm not getting the response I want from him. And that's all they put. And I replied, because I can't help it. I just replied and I said, it's a bit more than just Venus though. Like if it's a guy, he's probably going to identify more with his Mars placement. And, then we have to also take into consideration the sun and the moon, because they're both relationship planets as well. So she put a bit more information. But it was just really interesting to me that, it's so interesting that when somebody is that, I don't know if they're early in their studies or I'm not really sure what it is, but when you find a group, an online group, and you start sharing information, and it's very, I was going to say scarce. Like there's not a lot of information, or maybe not a lot of knowledge around the key factors that would enrich the reading. It can be quite, you can get people come back and just say, oh, Venus in Leo, oh, I know loads of Venus in Leo, they're so dramatic, and Venus in Capricorn, so boring. It can be just so basic, and you can find that it doesn't help you to really develop yourself. And this, again, with like Instagram and memes and stuff going around, sometimes the memes are so incorrect. It's just, I just can't believe that it's just a shame, because there's fake news and there's just fake astrology news. It's just, there's an awful lot of it. So I'd say, where at all possible, if you can avoid getting too involved with those memes, because sometimes they say things that are a bit condemning. And I don't think that you're necessarily going to be learning an awful lot from them that's of any use. My teacher, Frank Clifford, and when I was talking with Fernanda as well, Fernanda Piver, who is somebody I interviewed for the podcast, and she was saying that, Frank said, if you come away feeling scared or worried about something that you've read online, that's bad astrology. And that, you shouldn't get too wrapped up in these things. And you really, if there's content out there, I know I've got a lot of free content on my podcast, but if you're following a lot of blogs and there's a lot of content out there that is readily available for free, often it's not as credible. And I know that things are changing now. And that actually, there's a lot of free content out there, but you do have to be selective, and you do have to look for people who've really are more credible, I would say, just because anybody can sit down and set up a website and start blogging about things. And there's so much plagiarism going on among all my astrological colleagues. There's so many people being plagiarised at the moment for their work, and they're incredibly good astrologers who are having text lifted from their websites and pasted elsewhere, and people claiming that they'd written it themselves. It's shocking. I would say, if you're ever reading a source Think about the credentials of the person, think about the experience, the years of work, that they've put into it, rather than just sort of like following somebody who's creating memes which are often just so incorrect. There's just so many out there that are just wrong, and it does frustrate me. But I mean, that might not do too much harm, but it's not necessarily doing you any good to follow that stuff. And like I said, I touched on it earlier, so another point I've got here is scary claims, like being able to see death or see something bad coming. Anybody that reads a chart and talks about good or bad in a really matter-of-fact, this is bad, this is not good. I know there are different branches of astrology, and I know that there are a lot of people that practice Vedic astrology, and they do tend to talk about good or bad. So that's a whole different area. What I'm talking about is Western astrology. And, I don't necessarily feel that, you can, there are times that are going to be harder than others. There's going to be times full of challenge and times where things are easy and they flow and it just feels like it was meant to happen the way that it did. And I'm not saying that, I will not acknowledge good or bad. I'm not about toxic positivity. However, I mean, I wouldn't be recording episodes like this if I was all toxic positivity. However, I don't think it's useful or conducive to the client, or to anybody to have a reading where, bad things have been predicted. I had a reading from somebody who asked me to, when I first started learning, a Vedic astrologer contacted me and said, "Oh, can I look at your chart?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." I didn't even think about it. And he got back to me and went, "You have got Pluto. You've got Pluto in your 5th house, Saturn Pluto in your 5th house, which means you will probably have miscarriages." And it was so shocking and upsetting to read that, because even at the time when that happened, I didn't think, I wasn't planning to have a baby or anything, but that stuff stays with you. It stays with you. And if you say I remember when I joined the LSA, there was a woman that I met, and it was, I don't know if we'd been on a tarot course or something like that, and we were talking about astrology when we'd gone to the pub after one of the classes, and she said, "Oh, I'm a bit worried about astrology, just because I saw somebody once and they told me that I would see my death coming." And I said, "What? Really?" And she was like, "Well, I haven't let it bother me too much, because I just took it with a pinch of salt. But yeah, they said that when I die, I will see my death coming." And I said, "Did they kind of care to elaborate on how they came to that conclusion?" And she said, "No, they were quite vague about it." And I was like, and I said, "Well, that must have really affected you." And she went, "Well, no, not really." And I went, "Well, but why did you bring it up now then?" And she was like, "Well, I suppose, yeah, it has kind of stuck with me a bit." And I thought, how horrible to say that to somebody who that will always be in the back of their mind forever. It's a horrible thing to have to say, and it's just, I don't know how on earth they can claim to know that sort of thing. The chart is so multifaceted. There's so much depth to the chart. Why on earth would you fixate on something like that is of no use to anybody? It just makes somebody live in fear. So that really gets my goat. Another one, what have we got here? When people use astrology to take advantage. So we've got charlatans, predators, etc. So, sometimes I think that people who act in a predatory way aren't always aware of it. They don't realise that their behaviour is inappropriate. Possibly when I was in India and what happened with me, maybe he didn't realise his behaviour was quite predatory. However, there are people out there that use astrology readings as an opportunity to talk about how compatible they are with somebody sexually and why they should be together. Now, don't get me wrong. I know when lots of people start learning astrology, they think, "Oh, I'm going to get that bloke's chart and let's have a look at it, and let's have a look at how compatible we are." But that's, yeah, fair enough. We can do things like that, and that's part of the fun of learning. However, when you have somebody who literally uses a reading to flirt heavily with you and insinuate things, and for me, that kind of thing makes me uncomfortable. It really does. And I don't know, I just think that everybody's different. Everybody has different levels of what they find acceptable. But me personally, if I had a reading with somebody, whether it was a free reading that they'd offered me or if it was a reading I'd paid £150 for, I would come away not feeling very good about myself if they spent the whole time talking about, you've got this placement and this makes you like this. And it's really weird because I also have something doing that to your placement. And that means that we're very compatible. Or they might not be as direct and they might sort of, try to talk about how, you're vulnerable and you need protection and you need guidance. Like that kind of guru syndrome that you get with some guys who, or not just guys, but people who, have been studying something like astrology or some kind of occult subject or, spiritual mediumship, whatever, and they feel like they're some kind of master and they want to impart their gift and mentorship onto you. That can be, that for me is a red flag. And I have had a number of people in my time tell me that I'm vulnerable and I need guidance and I need this and I need that. And the one thing that I always think, whenever I've got people approaching me telling me this stuff, is not, gosh, they must be right, I must need that help. But actually, why on earth are they attracted to helping me? Perhaps, maybe, actually, they need me more than I need them. Maybe this is about them and their needs. So yeah, always keep that in the back of your mind if you've got somebody who is asking you to, if they can read for you, asking you if, they want to look at your chart a bit more or they want to give you a free treatment or whatever. Be selective. I think it's important. There have been times when I've had people offer free things to me, and when you're early on your journey of spiritual awakening, spirituality, astrology, whatever, you do get people who say, "Oh, I've been doing this for years. Let me give you a treatment. I'll do it for free." And then, here we go with another anecdote. There was a guy that I knew. I wasn't really bothered about being pals with him or anything, but a friend of mine introduced us, and he happened to be the father of somebody that I knew who worked in a bar that I was at, like hanging out at. And this guy was talking to me about his spiritual awakening, and he runs a mediumship circle and blah blah blah. And all of that stuff is like, not I'm an astrologer, like I just do astrology, like I'm not judging anybody who does any of that stuff. It's just not necessarily my route that I've taken. And then he said, "Oh, do you want to have some free spiritual healing?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, okay." And there would happen to be this chaise lounge type thing, like one of those psychiatrist couches that happened to be in the bar. And by the way, I lived above the bar, so if it was open, I'd pop in and say hello to the staff and stuff. It wasn't like I was just in a nightclub that this happened. But I popped in to say hi to them, and he said, "Yeah, just take a seat on that chaise lounge." So I laid back, and he said, "Right, okay, close your eyes." And I don't know what he was doing, but suddenly I felt his hands touching me on my solar plexus, which is kind of sort of like the stomach area, right underneath my boobs, basically. His hands were right underneath my boobs, and I found it so invasive. I suddenly was so shocked. I was just like, oh my God, I didn't think he was going to touch me. Like, do you know what I mean? I didn't know I was just naive. I didn't know what to expect. And I kind of felt really uncomfortable with it, but he'd finished and I was like, okay, thanks very much. And then he contacted my friend and got my friend to ring me and say, because he's given me a free treatment, he would like a reading from me. And obviously I won't be charging him because it's an exchange. So you have to be careful what you say yes to. And what happened eventually was I met up with him. I was really, really, really early in my astrology days. I spent ages trying to interpret his chart. And I met up with him. He suggested meeting at the pub, so I did. So many lessons learnt here. And he kept buying drinks for me, and I was accepting them. Still very naive, like I said. And then at the end of the night, he hit on me. And I was like really shocked because I was like, oh, you've grossly misread this situation. He was my friend's dad. He was married. And then he used 3 different types of persuasion to convince me that I should kiss him. One of them was, "Oh, come on." And then the other one was, "Well, you clearly don't know me very well at all then, at all, do you?" And what was the last one? Oh, it was a sympathy one as well. It was like, oh, I'm just a stupid old man. Three different persuasion techniques. And I thought to myself, as I was walking away from him, I just thought, I can't believe he is running a group with vulnerable women turning up who are looking for spiritual guidance. I just was like, oh my God. And then he bombarded me with emails which are like essays for months and months. And I still get the odd email from him. It was just very bizarre. But yeah, so you have to be careful about people who like to take advantage. Now, the other thing about that is that sometimes they can use the information that they have gleaned from your chart to hold information over you. So it can be like that they acting like they've seen something, and that you need to respect them, or you need to act in a certain way with them because they've got some kind of information on you. So kind of holding something over you, or like acting like they know you better than you know yourself, which is also not true. You can look at somebody's natal chart. It's like a window into who they are, but you don't know everything about that person. If you go to an astrologer, they can read the chart and it can sound like they know a lot about you, but they don't know you personally. They don't know about every experience you've ever had. They can look at how you're put together, what motivates you, how you respond to crisis, or how you respond to a challenge and difficulty, and they can probably time certain events in your life, but they're not going to be able to to know you exactly. So if anybody ever tries to sort of make you feel like they know you better than you know yourself, again, that's not right. And that's about power more than anything. That's not about your astrologer caring about your well-being. It's about them having some sense of power over you. And the other thing I would say that comes with that is that they may say, this annoys me so much, is when they start adding on services and say, oh, well, you're going to need to have this done then, and you're going to have that done, and that's going to cost you an extra £50 to £60 per session. And if you're going to an astrologer who is like they do an additional service, like I've got a friend who does astrology, homeopathy, and hypnotherapy, and then you can have add-on sessions and say, oh, this is part of this is what we would do, and maybe you're going to need like 4 sessions or something, and if you want some homeopathic remedies, I can get that sent over to you. And that'll be at an additional cost. That's understandable. But if somebody says they're going to read their chart for you, and then all of a sudden you're being told, oh gosh, there's this, and I can help you to navigate this, but it's going to cost you more, and that kind of thing, then if it's not clear from the word go what to expect from the reading, to me that's red flags. To me that is a red flag. I would always, when you're researching an astrologer, looking for somebody to go to, if you can't get a recommendation word of mouth from a friend or something like that, there are places you can look for recommendations. However, anybody here who's listening to this podcast, I've got people that I would recommend as well. So I don't do this podcast to solely generate interest in what I do. I also want to share that and spread the love, and I've got lots of astrologer friends who I recommend, and I can't answer everybody's questions, so I'm more than happy to direct people to a place that is going to be more suitable to them. So Frank Clifford tells me regularly that he has readings with people who have had such terrible readings with astrologers, being told that if they don't buy this special charm or lucky rabbit's foot or something, then they're going to die on Thursday, or something awful like that is just completely ridiculous, and just and then you've got people who are just like, but what if it really is true? What if I don't know? And it might sound stupid, but what if I don't do this and then something happens? I'm just thinking about this TV show called The IT Crowd, which is in the UK, and there's this one episode where they find this website that tells you the day you're going to die. And one of the characters is like, oh, I know when I'm going to die. I know when I'm going to die. I'm going to die when I'm 60 odd from whatever. And then he said, oh, don't tell me, I really don't want to know when I die. And he went, oh, okay, I've done it now, it's too late. And he went, you found out when I'm going to die? And he said, yeah, but don't worry about it, it's all right. And he said, well, how long have I got? And he went, it's Thursday, you're going to die on Thursday. Just stupid. But then he spends the whole time, it says like 1 p.m. on Thursday you're going to die, and then he spends the rest of his week just absolutely petrified that it's going to come true. But you know what, like, as much as I can giggle at that because that's a comedy, there are people that do that to people and try to get money out of them, and it's absolutely disgusting. Now, you know, the other thing that's not so good, you know, that can do more harm than good, is if you get a sense of dependency with an astrologer. And this is where the professional boundaries aren't observed properly. And, you know, it's not treated in a professional way where, you know, you understand that this is not professional boundaries are important because, you know, you don't want somebody to become dependent on you or you to become dependent on a person. And then you're stuck in a relationship which can actually be quite detrimental to both of you, because if one of you is not there for the other, you can feel responsible if that person was to take steps which were harmful to themselves, or, you know, it's not helpful to get into that kind of practice, you know. And it can be difficult as well when astrology becomes something that replaces real life and you look to astrology to blame everything that ever happens on astrology. Don't get me wrong, when you first start and you go, oh, Mercury's retrograde and that's why this is happening, or you know, oh my gosh, I'm having a Saturn transit and Saturn's doing this to me. And it's like, it's kind of more of a mirror. We can look at what's going on up there and we can see times in your life where these things are going to be more Saturnian, or you are going to have Mercury retrograde and you're going to have to deal with certain confusions and difficulties. However, you know, if you're living your life through astrology and you're not kind of you're kind of relying on that to be more of your... I'm not saying that you shouldn't use it as guidance, because if there's anybody guilty of doing this, it's me. And I'm somebody who looks at the natal chart constantly, looking, where's the moon? Why am I feeling like this? Oh my gosh, you know, finding out why my day's not going so great and things like that. But there's a point where it becomes more an obsession to the point that it's detrimental to your life, in your real life. I do remember, I think I read this somewhere, I can't remember if I read it or somebody told me, but there was a woman who passed away who really loved her astrology, and all of her children were just so they had a terrible relationship with her because she loved astrology and put astrology first, to the point that it was damaging to her relationship with her family. But she was so committed to the craft, and it destroyed her relationship. In the same way that I know that there's somebody else I know who had a terrible relationship with his children, and, you know, he really put his children second to his religion, and they just never, they couldn't forgive him for that. It just, they always felt second best. So you know, these things where they can do more harm than good, maybe they can apply in many areas of life and not just astrology. But I just thought I'd do a little show based on this because I just think it's worth noting that though some of us might see astrology as a bit of fun and making a flippant comment to somebody one day about their chart, the words could stick and it could really, really cause them to have a difficult time, and they could really freak out about it, and it can do a lot of damage. So I think we should be responsible and think about what we're saying and what we're doing. I'm curious to know if anybody's had any bad experiences with astrologers, if they've had a bad reading, or if somebody's ever looked at their chart in passing and said something that was, you know, it stuck with them, or perhaps maybe you've had somebody who used a reading as an opportunity to, you know, hit on you, or, you know, kind of pursue their own agenda rather than just using it as an opportunity to help you to see your way through some confusing times, or just offer some insight into yourself. You know, I would be really interested if any of the points that we covered here today have ever kind of affected you personally. And hopefully you're enjoying these episodes that I'm kind of doing on a bit of ethical practice. But I do feel like it's important to talk about it. So, okay, that's kind of it for today. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do like me, leave a review on iTunes. You can leave a 5-star review if you're feeling generous, and a few words so that other people feel, they can see what they think about this podcast for themselves just from the reviews, and will be more likely to have a listen and get involved. But I'm dead serious. Do contact me and let me know if you've had any experiences which were not so great. All right, you guys, take care, and I'll speak to you next time. Thanks a lot.